The United States has expressed willingness to remove sanctions on Iran as part of efforts to lure Iran back into the nuclear deal that was signed in 2015. Diplomats from three major powers and the European Union met separately on Wednesday with Iran and the United States to discuss the matter. And the talks explored a number of issues, including sanctions that Washington might remove. They also looked at nuclear curbs that Tehran might observe in an effort to bring both back into compliance with the 2015 nuclear deal.
U.S. State Department spokesperson Ned Price says that they are prepared to sit down with Iran to discuss terms of lifting the sanctions.
We are not and will not offer any unilateral gestures or incentives to sweeten any sort of deal or to induce Iran to back to the negotiating table or to a better position at that negotiating table. The second point I will say is that this administration is committed, working in many cases with our allies and partners, to holding Iran to account for precisely the offenses you listed. Its human rights abuses, its support for terrorism, its ballistic missile program. When it comes to those areas, that is precisely why our strategy sees the mutual return to the JCPOA as necessary but insufficient. Insufficient because we seek not only a longer and stronger deal, but over the longer term, working with partners in the region, follow-on agreements to address these very issues. Now, we don't need to arrive at those follow-on agreements for us to hold Iran to account for its behavior, because we will continue to do that right now. When it comes to sanctions, the point I made before remains. We are prepared to take the steps necessary to return to compliance with the JCPOA, including by lifting sanctions that are inconsistent with the JCPOA.
Longtime foes, the United States and Iran, have said that they do not expect quick breakthroughs in the talks that began in Vienna on Tuesday, with European and other diplomats as intermediaries, because Tehran rejects face-to-face talks for now. Iran's chief nuclear negotiator urged the U.S. to lift the sanctions from his country in a bid to restore the 2015 nuclear accord, as talks between Iran and the world power still party to the deal ended in Vienna. Former U.S. President Donald Trump withdrew from the 2015 deal, which lifted economic sanctions on Iran in return for curbs to its nuclear program, and reimposed U.S. sanctions, prompting Iran to violate the accord's atomic limitations. The deal's remaining parties, which are Iran, Britain, China, France, Germany and Russia, have agreed to form two expert-level groups whose jobs is to marry lists of sanctions that the United States could lift with nuclear obligations Iran should meet.
University of Tehran Professor Seyed Marandi joins us now to share some insights on the latest. Prof, always good to talk to you. The last time we spoke, this meeting was quite a way off, but it's happening. Are you optimistic it's going to yield fruit?
I think it's best not to be optimistic or pessimistic. We have to see how things play out. The United States has never been honest in the past, and we don't expect it to be honest today. So Iran has to be very wary and make sure that the United States does not find any loopholes in order to play with the JCPOA. The situation for Iran is very clear. The JCPOA means the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. The deal is comprehensive, so everything is clear-cut for both sides. And the Iranians believe that it's quite simple, the solution. The United States has to remove all of the sanctions, whether nuclear or non-nuclear, because the non-nuclear sanctions are impeding the implementation of the nuclear deal, and they are basically an excuse just to harm the Iranian economy. So if the United States removes all sanctions and then there is verification, we can move forward. The reason why verification is so important is because during Obama, the United States deceived Iran. They said one thing at the negotiating table, they signed that during the agreement, but in reality, they lied. And for example, Iran was supposed to benefit from the international financial system, but the United States behind the scenes threatened all the major banks, financial institutions, insurance companies, shipping companies not to work with Iran. So this time round, the Iranians are saying the Americans must implement the deal in full, remove all the sanctions, and it must be verified. It must be verified. If that happens, the Iranians will implement the deal in full.
Can Iran afford to be hardline this time around? Because sanctions are quite painful.
The issue is not one of, let's say, choice. The Iranians and the Americans have a deal. The Iranians did not appease Trump for the last 4 years. They're definitely not going to appease Biden, who is much weaker than Trump, and the United States today is much weaker than it was a few years ago. The Iranians know that if the nuclear deal is not implemented and the Americans somehow get new concessions from Iran, that appeasement will lead us down a very dangerous road, because then the United States will learn that through thuggish behavior, through violating agreements, it can get more. And that will be a never-ending process. So the Iranians are saying that, look, we already have an agreement. We already gave concessions. We were already flexible. That's how we got to the JCPOA, the nuclear deal. So the Americans have no excuse, especially since Biden, he was the vice president of the administration that signed this nuclear deal. So the Americans have obligations. The Iranians have obligations. If the Americans carry out their obligations, the Iranians will carry out theirs. Other than that, there's nothing that the Iranians will accept.
So you see the Iranians pulling back from enriching more uranium. We know that 55 kilograms of 20% enriched uranium has been produced since January. Why?
Because it's Iran's right to produce enriched uranium at whatever levels it deems appropriate. If the other side is not going to abide by its commitments, then why should Iran abide by its commitments? Iran is a sovereign and independent country. It's a member of the NPT, and it's also a member of the International Atomic Energy Agency. Iran is not violating any international law, but Iran was supposed to decrease its the amount of uranium it enriches, as well as the degree to which it enriches uranium within the context of the nuclear deal. But since the Americans and the Europeans are violating the nuclear deal, the Iranians are no longer going to abide by it. Remember, when the Americans left the nuclear deal, the Iranians stayed inside, and they continue to abide by it, to show the international community that the problem is the United States, not Iran. Now Biden has become president. At the moment, he's continuing with Trump's maximum pressure campaign. He continues to target Iranian women and children to get extra concessions. Iran's not going to accept that. So Iran is going to expand its nuclear program, and it will only accept limitations if the other side carries out its commitments. It's clear as day. There's no plan B. Either the Americans accept what they promised to do, or we have no deal.
Are you not convinced by any of the statements that have been made during the course of this week by the Americans?
No, there's no way that anyone can trust the Americans. I mean, the Americans, they dishonestly invaded Iraq. They lied about intelligence. They lied about Libya. They lie about everything. They do not fulfill their promises. The Americans have never been honest, and they've never been trustworthy. So Iran is not going to work with Americans based on mutual trust. It's only through verification. It's only when the Americans promise that they will carry out what they promise to do, and when those promises are verified, that the Iranians will accept. Iran is not some weak country. It's a very powerful and independent country. It has remained steadfast for over 4 decades now. It has withstood the most brutal pressure from the United States. The United States gave Saddam Hussein chemical weapons, the U.S. and its allies. The United States imposed all sorts of sanctions targeting women and children. The United States and its allies supported extremist groups in the region. All of this was done, at least in parts, to undermine Iran, and the United States failed. Are the Iranians willing to have a better relationship with the United States? Of course. But as long as the United States abides by its commitments. If the United States does not abide by its commitments, then how can we ever negotiate with them again? Because if they do not respect what they've already negotiated in the past and the results of those negotiations, future negotiations are meaningless. So if the Americans want in future to be able to talk to the Iranians, first they have to do what they promised to do already.
Professor Seyed Marandi, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks very much indeed. And I guess only time will tell who is being sincere and truthful. Thanks for your time.